Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're navigating a really fascinating timeline of events. It spans nearly a decade, actually, from late 2015 right up to the present day.
Right, yeah.
Our mission, like always, is to help you cut through some of the noise, pull out the important insights, and help connect the dots. We're looking at shifts in public discourse, how institutions responded, policy decisions across some critical areas.
And what's interesting about this particular timeline, this curated set of events,
Yeah,
is how it lets us see patterns. Dynamics that might seem unconnected at first glance.
exactly.
We'll be looking at things like education, media, government actions, even how big challenges like the COVID pandemic were handled. We'll use specific examples to kind of light up the broader trends.
Absolutely. Think of it like peering through a historical microscope. We want to understand not just what happened, but maybe why it matters now, what it tells us about this moment. We'll pull out those pivotal moments, dig into their significance, and hopefully help you grasp that bigger picture. So, okay, let's jump right in. Our journey starts back in late 2015. There was an incident at Yale that, well, it really set an early tone for these discussions around campus culture, free expression.
Ah, yes, the Yale Halloween email situation.
That's the one, November 6, 2015. Students demanding resignations from faculty over this email. Our source points this out as a moment where students were calling for, and this is a quote, upsetting opinions be entirely eradicated, all in the name of creating safe spaces.
Right.
And the core idea presented in the source is interesting. Politics should be studied at a university. It shouldn't be the operating system of a university.
That quote really gets to the heart of it. This first event, it shows this fundamental tension starting to really surface at universities. How do you balance, a welcoming environment with these core principles of open inquiry, robust debate?
It's a tough balance.
It is. And what these early events suggest is maybe a shift in how the university's role was being seen, moving away from just a marketplace of ideas, even uncomfortable ones, towards an environment where emotional safety is prioritized. Sometimes, it seems, at the expense of that open inquiry itself.
That's a crucial distinction. And like you said, it wasn't isolated. If we fast forward just a bit to May 6, 2016, Harvard University announced a pretty significant policy change.
Uh-huh. The single-sex clubs.
Exactly. Members of independent, single-sex, off-campus groups, they'd be blacklisted from big scholarships like the Rhodes and Marshall, banned from leadership roles on campus, even athletic teams. Our sources say this was described as, quote, a stunning attack on freedom of association, so directly impacting students based on who they chose to associate with.
Wow. And this pattern, this challenge to traditional academic freedoms, it didn't stop there. We see more examples. March 3, 2017, Middlebury College. Violent protests injured a professor, forced an invited speaker, Charles Murray, to actually flee a lecture hall.
Yeah, I remember that.
And around the same time, March 2017, again, Professor Brett Weinstein at Evergreen State College. He resigned after publicly opposing the student request for white faculty and students to stay off campus for a day of absence, which then led to activists demanding he be fired.
So putting these together, it really paints a picture, doesn't it? The pressure on faculty, maybe pressure to conform to certain viewpoints, it became a real tangible concern.
Absolutely.
The insight here, I think, is that these weren't just disagreements. They seem to mark a shift towards demands for, well, conformity of opinion, and maybe a willingness to use pretty disruptive tactics to enforce those demands, which naturally raises some big questions about intellectual inquiry in universities.
Exactly. This whole period really showcases that growing friction. Friction between these evolving ideas of inclusivity and the bedrock principles of academic freedom and free speech. It definitely influenced the conversation about what a university is even for.
And this push and pull on campus, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It seemed to mirror a wider trend, an escalation in public discourse more broadly.
That's right.
Our timeline shows this parallel trend in political talk, media reporting, starting around 2016. The source points to the tragic Dallas police shooting on July 7, 2016, 5 officers killed. And it notes this perceived difficulty in just finding a simple, straightforward timeline of what happened. Instead, it suggests, and again, this is from the source, that all the news was in complete spin mode or attempting to shape a narrative right afterwards.
Yeah, and that observation about the media coverage, especially during such a critical event, it really highlights a challenge for all of us trying to understand things.
Yeah.
When you don't have a clear timeline and there's this feeling of spin mode, it makes finding objective truth harder. It can definitely affect public perception, maybe even trust in the media itself.
Definitely. And then alongside this, we see these really strong statements coming from political figures. The rhetoric starts to heat up quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
October 2016, Joe Biden, talking about debating an opponent, says, quote, "No, I wish we were in high school. I could take him behind the gym. That's what I wish."
Right.
Not long after, January 2017, Madonna at the Women's March says, "Yes, I am angry. Yes, I am outraged. Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House."
Pretty strong language.
Yeah.
And that trend, that kind of provocative language, it just kept going into 2018.
Yeah.
You had Kamala Harris joking on Ellen about being in an elevator with political opponents, asking if only one of them has to come out alive. Then later that year, Nancy Pelosi stating, "I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country." Maxine Waters advising you, if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant,
Yeah.
you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them.
And Cory Booker urging people to get up in the face of some Congress people.
Right. It all kind of culminated in October 2018 when Hillary Clinton said, "You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for." That's when civility can start again, basically making civility conditional.
Looking at this pattern, this increasingly harsh rhetoric, it feels like more than just disagreement. It signals maybe a strategic move, framing political opponents not just as wrong, but as, well, existential threats.
That's a good point.
And the insight there is how that kind of narrative shift, it really makes civil discussion almost impossible, doesn't it? Policy debates become like moral crusades. Compromise starts to look like you're selling out.
Yeah, it definitely raises the stakes. And this heated rhetoric, it was playing out against a backdrop of some significant administrative actions and questions about oversight, too, which led to more questions about accountability, integrity.
Like the James Comey situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
June 2017, Comey testifies he kept and leaked notes about conversations with President Trump. He claimed they were his personal property, not FBI property.
Which was controversial. Then later, an Inspector General report, the OIG report, in August 2019, it described Comey's actions as, quote, "the unauthorized disclosure of sensitive investigative information in order to achieve a personally desired outcome." And it found his actions violated department and FBI policies.
Right. And in parallel, you had the Mueller report concluding in April 2019 that the investigation did not establish conspiracy or coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia's election interference.
Yeah. And then the follow-up, in December 2020, the revelation about the FBI lawyer, Kevin Kleinsmith. He pleaded guilty to falsifying an email used in a FISA application, that's the secret court process to monitor Carter Page, making it look like Page hadn't been a CIA source when apparently he had been.
So these events, taken together, they really expose the complexities and the controversies around how institutions conduct themselves, especially during political investigations.
Definitely.
The details about Comey, the Mueller findings, the Kleinsmith plea, they raise really serious questions about evidence standards, impartiality, the potential for political motives inside government agencies, the impact on public trust in these institutions. I mean, it's significant. It shows how fast narratives about accountability can shift.
Yeah. That intensity we saw in the political sphere, it didn't just stay there. It almost feels like it foreshadowed the kind of dramatic shifts we then saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in public health responses.
That's an interesting connection.
Our sources point to a grant proposal from way back in March 2018. It detailed high-risk coronavirus research. And then, less than 2 years later, a SARS-like virus, matching that description pretty closely, caused the outbreak.
Right, and that proximity, that timing, it naturally leads to questions about the virus origins, about transparency around that kind of research. The fact that the grant proposal was so specific and so close to the outbreak, it just underlines why those inquiries are still ongoing.
Absolutely. And then comes this really pivotal period highlighting these major shifts, sometimes complete reversals in what experts were saying and what official guidance was.
Yeah, the messaging seemed to change quite rapidly at times.
Right. For instance, Dr. Peter Hotez. This source cites him as moving from initially, quote, warning about COVID vaccines, to then, by March 2020, recommending every single subsequent vaccine and booster for everyone regardless of age. A pretty significant shift. And then there's the mask guidance. May 2020, the New England Journal of Medicine publishes an article saying masks outside hospitals give little help. But then, just a month later, June 2020, 3 of the 5 authors kind of backtrack, saying masking is good when you can't social distance.
Yeah.
Our source notes this as, quote, the scientific community. deciding to change the narrative. And also in June 2020, you had public health officials reportedly saying social justice matters more than social distance, which certainly raised eyebrows about consistency and priorities during a health crisis.
These rapid, sometimes contradictory shifts, they didn't just confuse people, did they? It feels like they created this fertile ground for skepticism, maybe eroded trust in institutions, fostered a climate where expertise itself became politicized.
Which has lasting implications potentially for future public health situations.
No doubt. And this trend continued, with different viewpoints kind of struggling to be heard. You had the Great Barrington Declaration, October 5, 2020, released by, quote, infectious disease epidemiologists and public health scientists. Right, expressing grave concerns about the prevailing policies, recommending focused protection instead.
And that declaration, according to our source, was reportedly censored. Then, fast forward to September 9, 2021, the Biden administration announces that OSHA rule, mandating vaccines or weekly tests for employers with 100-plus employees.
A very significant move.
And then you get contrasting viewpoints again. November 2021, Dr. Scott Youngblood, a military physician, presents to San Diego leaders about what he called the efficacy failure of the mass-mandated program. His conclusion, no rationale to have or extend mandates, none whatsoever.
Strong words. And then in February 2022, an observation attributed to Dr. Paul Offit suggested that Dr. Fauci knew not everyone needed the COVID vaccine, but recommended it anyway.
So the implication here for public health policy is huge. All these conflicting views, the shifting guidance, the debates over censorship, it understandably left a lot of people just trying to figure out who to trust, what information was right, which ultimately must have impacted compliance and maybe even health outcomes.
It created a very confusing landscape for the average person, certainly.
Yeah. And beyond the pandemic itself, these themes we've been tracking, social advocacy, DEI initiatives, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, censorship debates, they kept extending into other sectors too, often sparking really heated discussions.
Right. These weren't just happening in isolation.
Around 2019, for example, Kamala Harris reportedly supported, quote, taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries for illegal immigrants.
And then in the academic world again, March 2019, Cambridge University withdrew an offer for Jordan Peterson to be a visiting fellow. That was after backlash about his views on gender and politics.
And June 2020, Professor Gordon Klein at UCLA, placed on leave after he declined a student request to postpone finals for Black students because of George Floyd's death. That sparked huge debates about equality versus academic standards.
The corporate world saw changes too. LinkedIn adding pronouns to profiles by March 2021. That became quite common.
And on a bigger structural level, NASDAQ proposed rules in December 2020. The SEC approved them in August 2021, requiring companies listed on their exchange to disclose board diversity stats.
Right, the comply or explain model.
Exactly. They needed to have, or explain why they didn't have, at least 2 diverse directors, one self-identified female and one from an underrepresented minority or LGBTQ+ background.
So if you step back and look at this broader pattern, it really suggests a significant push towards institutionalizing these diversity metrics. And you see the growing influence of what are often called social justice frameworks, both in universities and in corporations.
Which raises some pretty fundamental questions, right?
It does. Questions about individual autonomy versus collective mandates, about the extent to which institutions, public and private, should align themselves with specific social or political ideologies.
And a striking thread here is how these trends kept showing up in free speech issues, especially back on campus, echoing some of those earlier debates we talked about.
It seems like a recurring theme.
October 2021, Dr. Abbas' lecture on climate science at MIT got canceled. Why? Because of his stated opposition to certain aspects of affirmative action and diversity initiatives.
Then, August 2022, 9 student groups at Berkeley Law adopted bylaws saying they wouldn't invite speakers who support Zionism or the State of Israel. Positions these groups deemed unacceptable, according to the timeline.
In December 2022, Stanford introduces this guide aiming to eliminate harmful terms from its websites. Words like American, masters, even blind were on the list. It got widespread criticism for being so expansive.
That generated a lot of headlines, and the challenges continued right into 2023. March, you had Stanford law students shouting down a federal judge, Stuart Kyle Duncan, when he came to speak.
Right, and the same month, Cornell students passed a resolution calling for mandatory trigger warnings on course material. Though, interestingly, the university administration rejected that proposal in April 2023. They cited concerns about academic freedom, the educational mission, fostering open inquiry.
So these examples, they really illustrate this ongoing struggle within universities trying to balance inclusivity or perceptions of harm with these fundamental principles of free inquiry and expression.
Yeah.
The repeated attempts to deplatform speakers, restrict certain views, police language,
Uh,
plus the institutional responses, sometimes pushing back, sometimes not, it just reveals this deeply contested landscape about the whole purpose and the boundaries of academic discussion.
the implication is pretty significant, isn't it? These aren't just campus squabbles. They highlight this complex, ongoing debate that really affects how we learn, how we communicate, how we interact in society. So, our timeline now brings us to more recent events. Things touching on election narratives, continued political division, and then a really striking reflection from a university leader that almost brings us full circle.
Okay?
October 2020, right before the election, media and intelligence officials were described in our source as having, quote, peddled online disinformation to sway an election regarding the Hunter Biden laptop story.
That story.
Then, much later, August 2023, you have CNN's Jake Tapper admitting, quote, Trump was right and Joe Biden was wrong about Hunter Biden's foreign income. But he notes this truth was acknowledged only 2.5 years after the fact.
Yeah, that delay. 2.5 years. In correcting what was initially dismissed, often very strongly as disinformation. That's particularly noteworthy. It really highlights challenges in media accountability, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the potential impact on public trust, maybe even election outcomes. It shows how certain narratives can stick around for years, even when evidence emerges.
And adding another layer here, the Durham report came out in May 2023. This was the investigation into the origins of the FBI's Trump campaign probe.
Right.
It found the investigation was triggered by uncorroborated intelligence and that senior FBI officials displayed a serious lack of analytical rigor and showed apparent confirmation bias.
That conclusion, well, it definitely fueled more discussions about institutional integrity, about the potential politicization of government agencies. Those kinds of findings are really pivotal in shaping how the public sees fairness and due process within our investigative bodies.
And we also see the continuation of that really strong rhetoric from political leaders emphasizing these deep divisions. September 2022, President Biden tweets, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are a threat to the very soul of this country.
Very strong framing.
That sentiment gets repeated. December 2023, he says the greatest threat he poses is to our democracy. June 2024, again, Donald Trump is a genuine threat to this nation. He's literally a threat to everything America stands for. And in a similar vein, April 2024, a tweet from Ryan Rith, democracy is on the ballot and we cannot lose.
Ultimately, this sustained rhetoric, especially from a sitting president framing an opponent as an existential threat to democracy, it just signals how deeply polarized the political landscape has become. It transforms basic disagreements into these huge existential battles for the country's future. It ramps up the stakes of elections, hardens those partisan lines, and makes compromise, or even just civil conversation, increasingly difficult.
And this climate, this intense political rhetoric and division, it seems to play out in public opinion too, and maybe even in how institutions reflect on themselves. A January 2024 study indicated that, quote, 89% of Ivy League graduates favor the strict rationing of gas, meat, and electricity to fight climate change.
89%. That suggests a very strong alignment with specific, quite drastic policy approaches among that particular group.
And then most recently on our timeline, September 2025. The president of Dartmouth makes this, well, quite striking admission, stating the school got away from education as focus and was too focused on social advocacy.
Wow. That reflection coming from a university president, it really brings us back to those early campus debates, doesn't it?
It really does.
It highlights this maybe growing recognition, at least within some institutions, about how their role might have shifted over the decade. That admission feels like a significant moment. It suggests a potential reevaluation is happening, acknowledging that tension between academic rigor and social activism, a tension that's been a constant theme right through this whole timeline we've explored.
Yeah, this decade-long evolution across education, media, politics, it certainly suggests a period of really significant shifts, challenges to norms we might have taken for granted, and maybe an ongoing struggle to redefine the roles of key institutions in our society. Wow. That was quite a journey through almost 10 years of events. From those demands at Yale back in 2015, right up to that Dartmouth reflection in 2025. Our deep dive has really shown how concepts we think we understand, free speech, academic freedom, media neutrality, institutional accountability, how they've been constantly challenged, reshaped.
Absolutely.
We've seen these profound shifts in rhetoric, in policy, in what the public expects across education, government, society, really everywhere.
Indeed. And what's fascinating, I think, is that consistent thread running through it all. Institutions, public figures, grappling with these tough questions.
Yes.
Censorship, incitement, the truthfulness of information, that really tricky balance between individual liberties and collective mandates or goals.
Yeah. Yeah.
The timeline gives us this stark illustration of just how quickly narratives can change and how deeply politics and social issues seem to have become intertwined with, well, almost every part of our lives.
Exactly. And for you, our listener, hopefully this isn't just a list of dates and events. It's a chance to see how the past really does shape the present. It helps you maybe understand the different forces at play, gives you a clearer perspective on the often complex, sometimes confusing conversations happening all around us every day. So I guess the question is, what does this decade of shifts mean for where we're headed?
Hmm. That's the big question. It really prompts us to consider this. In a world where information can be spun so easily or suppressed or amplified incredibly quickly, what responsibility do we all have? Individuals, institutions. The responsibility to not just seek out and protect truth, but to really diligently, transparently present that unvarnished truth.
That is a powerful thought to maybe ponder as you go about your week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this exploration has given you some new insights, maybe even a fresh perspective on the complex, fascinating tapestry of our times.